What's going on, YouTube? So in the crowded compact crossover segment, there is one crossover that consistently garners a lot of praise from auto enthusiasts, and that is this Mazda CX-5. But beyond driving enjoyment, this is still one of the class leaders in many other regards as well. And for 2020, Mazda is further refining the package with several new and updated features. Now, of course, we do want to take a second to thank our friends at Paul Miller Mazda for providing us with the CX-5. And if you're in the market for any new Mazda, make sure you stop by their dealership or visit them via their website. So with that stuff said, let's see if this CX-5 is better than RAV4 and CR-V. So let's start out here with the exterior design. It really hasn't changed for 2020. So what you'll continue to find is this signature U-shaped Mazda grille with the black mesh finish. That is across all of the trim levels, unlike some of the other Mazdas where the signature trim will get a special silver finish in the inside. This just remains black across all the trim levels. Now, as far as your headlights, they are LED across all of the trim levels. However, if you choose the Grand Touring and up, that's where you're going to get this fancier arrangement with adaptive abilities, as well as the kind of BMW-like LED daytime running light. Grand Touring and up does also throw in this LED fog light as well. Now, coming down here to your wheels, there continue to be just two options on the CX-5. This is the 19-inch setup, which is standard on the Grand Touring and up. However, it does have a different finish if you go for the signature trim. And then if you go for the lower Touring or Sport trims, they come with a smaller 17-inch alloy. And as far as your mirrors are concerned, you will have heating on the Grand Touring and up. You'll have power folding on the Grand Touring Reserve and up. However, the one feature I really like is that blind spot monitoring is integrated into the mirror, and that's standard on every single trim.
Now, here at the rear of the 2020 CX-5, you're not going to find any changes this year, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because I've always thought this rear design looks pretty nice. And as far as the actual feature set is concerned, we do have LED taillights on the Grand Touring trims and higher. The other two lower trims will just have a halogen brake light. And on the bumper here, we do have dual exhaust pipes, and that is on every single CX-5. Now, safety is going to be an area where you are going to see some changes for this 2020 model. The iActive Safety Sense Suite is now standard on every single trim level of the CX-5, which brings it in line with a lot of its rivals like the Toyota RAV4 and Honda CR-V. That means it includes radar cruise control with stop and go, automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection, lane keeping assist, and auto high beam headlights. Well, that sums up all the exterior design for this CX-5, so now let's go ahead and hop in the inside.
So just walking up to the 2020 CX-5, you will notice one of the changes right off the bat, and that's going to be the brand new Mazda key fob that debuted on the Mazda 3 has now been added to the CX-5. The smart entry system, that's going to be standard on the Sport and up. And then to get inside the vehicle itself, there is not a sensor behind the handle, so you just press the little black button. And when you do, the mirrors will fold outward if you choose the Grand Touring Reserve or above. And then taking a peek inside the cabin, there's not been any major changes to the design this year, but there have been some feature changes which we'll point out as we go along. Now, as far as your color and material options, it does remain the same for 2020, which means you have just about as many options as in a luxury vehicle. So starting on your base Sport, that's going to be a cloth seat with black only. The Touring upgrades you to a leatherette in black or silk color options. Grand Touring and Grand Touring Reserve have real leather in black or parchment colors. And then finally, your signature, that gets you fine Napa leather in an exclusive Catura brown color. Now, turning over here to your door trim, it is very, very nicely appointed for a vehicle in this class. You'll find leather covering almost the entirety of it, so across the armrest with the color contrast stitching, as well as across all of the upper area with some more stitching. We do have a faux wood accent on this model. However, if you get the Signature, it will be a genuine piece of wood. And then all 4 of your windows are one-touch automatic. Coming down here to the seats themselves, this is an 8-way power adjusting seat with 2-way lumbar. That's on the majority of the trims. And then on the Grand Touring and up, you will find the 2-stage memory seating. This is the GT Reserve, so we're looking at real leather, and once again, you have a very attractive and nice looking stitching design. Now, ever since this generation of the CX-5 debuted back in 2017, it has certainly had one of the most luxurious cabins in the class, and that does continue here in 2020. So what you'll be looking at is a nice soft touch plastic across the upper part of the dashboard, and then dropping down here to your middle area, this is all covered in a leatherette with a stitching detail. Once again, we have some faux wood trim through here. It's all soft touch on this lower part. And then so long as you choose the Grand Touring and up, you will also have the leather padded center tunnel. Now to start up the CX-5, just put your foot on the brake and press the button. Now, as you could probably tell, this is Mazda's 7-inch reconfigurable gauge cluster, and it is standard on the Grand Touring and up. And what you do is basically just press this info button right here, and you can cycle through a variety of different types of information. And in addition to that, if you go for the Grand Touring Reserve or higher, that's where you'll get the head-up display also thrown in. Now, coming back to the steering wheel, Mazda does nicely include a leather wrapping across all of the models, even the base one. And one really unique feature they've added for 2020 is that rain sensing wipers are standard equipment, even on that very base model. As far as the wheel itself, it is manual tilt and telescoping, and you will also find heating if you go for the Grand Touring Reserve or Signature. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about storage, where the CX-5 does do roughly as well as the competition. So when you open this up, you'll see you have a removable tray to start out with, and then once inside, there is plenty of space, and there is a nice felt lining down at the bottom, in addition to your 2 USBs and a 12-volt outlet. Up in front of that, you have your 2 cup holders, and then in the very front here, we have a really large bin with a nice rubber lining, and you also find another 12-volt outlet right there. As far as the shifter, of course, this is your traditional Mazda shifter. You can press to the left here to shift manually, and if you go for the turbo-equipped models, which is the GT Reserve and Signature, that's where you'll also find the paddle shifters thrown in. When we head into reverse, you will see the standard backup camera up here. This is what is included on all of the trim levels except for the Signature, which gets a 360-degree camera system. And then back behind the shifter, you do have your electronic parking brake and brake hold feature. Alright, so now off to the side here, this is where you'll find your volume knob. On the Grand Touring and up is where you get the upgraded 10-speaker Bose Centerpoint sound system. So we'll go ahead and take a sample of that. Yeah, this is certainly a great sounding sound system, especially in a class of vehicle where some of the sound systems are pretty lackluster. And moving on from that, we have our climate controls. This is the dual zone automatic setup, which is standard on all but the very base sport model. And as you can see, all of your buttons are easily laid out and physically represented right here. Additionally, on all but that very base model, you will find 3-stage seat heating, though you will have to get the Grand Touring Reserve or higher if you want ventilation. Alright, and now that brings us up here to our MazdaConnect system. Now this is one of the differences for 2020, not in the software itself, since that is the same as the older style MazdaConnect system, but in the screen, which is now an 8-inch display instead of the 7-inch display when you go for the Grand Touring Reserve or Signature. But as far as the actual features, it does remain the same, so you can use the controller knob, or you can also touch the display. Now, as far as important features to point out, I'll go ahead and click into the applications. That's where you'll find both Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, so long as you go for at least the Touring trim level. Additionally, we don't have the navigation card installed right now on this particular model. However, it is standard equipment if you go for the Grand Touring or above. Now moving on from that, you will find an auto-dimming mirror on the Grand Touring and up. However, the design would be frameless if you go for the Signature. And then also on the Grand Touring and up, that's where you will find this power moonroof as standard equipment. It is just the regular size unit. There is not a panoramic one offered at this time. But anyways, guys, that is going to sum up everything to look at in the front part of the cabin. So now Mason will go ahead and show you guys what's new in the back.
So hopping back to the rear seats of this CX-5, this is obviously a very important part for a crossover like this. So Mazda does give you a very nice equipment level with the CX-5. So here in the center, we do have vents that are standard on all but the very base model. And then the rest of the features are going to be located in the armrest here. So when you fold it down, you do have cup holders inside. And you will also notice that we do have 3-stage heated rear seats. Really nice for a day like today. And that is standard on the Grand Touring Reserve and the Signature trim. And then here in the little storage compartment, you have a little tiny area that is felt lined, as well as 2 smart charging USB ports. But as far as the space itself is concerned, we are going to find a good amount of space for this class of vehicle. We have 40 inches of rear legroom and 39 inches of rear headroom, which does place it above a lot of the main rivals, like the Toyota RAV4. However, it is still a little bit less than the Honda CR-V. But behind rear seating position, definitely no issues back here. I have a couple inches of legroom. I have tons of room for my feet up under the seat. So really, anyone back here is going to be definitely comfortable. So coming up to the tailgate, it is going to be power on the Grand Touring trims and higher. However, you will never have any foot activation or anything like that. So just push the button to open. And once inside the CX-5's trunk, you are going to find a little bit smaller than average amount of space back here. It's going to be rated at 31 cubic feet of space behind the second row seats, and that expands to 60 cubic feet if you fold them. Like I was mentioning, that is less than its main rivals like the RAV4 and Honda CR-V. However, Mazda does finish it nicely back here. We have a 12-volt outlet here on the side, and up underneath of the floor we do have a spare tire. Here on this Grand Touring Reserve, we do have a 6-way power adjusting passenger seat. And in front of the passenger, you do have a good sized glove box, stamped, nicely felt lined. And up top, we do have a sun visor with a light and mirror, and it does also detach and have an extension in the end. But anyway, guys, that sums up all of the rear areas of this Mazda CX-5. So now let's go ahead and take this turbo engine out on the road.
Now before we really get started here, I do want to mention one unfortunate thing that has occurred, and that's that as we filmed through, we noticed that the tire on our Grand Touring Reserve was flat.
Yeah.
So before we got the chance to head out on the road or anything, obviously that kind of spoiled that. So we've now switched to a different CX-5. They didn't have any more available with the turbo, so now we have the regular naturally aspirated CX-5, which is fine. course, we really enjoy driving the turbo model, but the truth of the matter is most people do choose to have this regular version, so we'll go ahead and sample that out today.
And we do have a review of the turbo from last year, so if you're really interested in just the turbo for the test drive, go check that out.
Right. So there's our first acceleration in this 2.5 liter Skyactiv engine, 187 horsepower, 186 pound-feet of torque. So certainly very respectable numbers for this class of vehicle. And I thought power felt pretty good. There's certainly many in this class that feel slower than that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a combination of maybe their transmissions or whatever, but I do have to agree with him on that. It does seem like this is a peppier than most in the class. It feels lively, even though this is the base engine. And also, it sounds exactly the same. You know, I remember what the one last year sounded like, or with the turbo, and yeah, it sounds exactly the same. So
it does. Now, as far as that turbo engine, that is a 2.5 liter turbo 4-cylinder, 250 horsepower, and for 2020, 310 pound-feet of torque. So it does get these same upgrades as that CX-9 that we showed you guys a month or so ago. So that is up 10 pound-feet of torque over last year. But Mason says I might have said something wrong. 320 pound-feet of torque.
Yes.
If I didn't say that, you get the point. 320 pound-feet of torque, up 10 pound-feet of torque from 310 pound-feet of torque. Not sure exactly what I said. I might have said 310 up from 310. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. Just to clarify that.
320 this year.
Except on regular fuel, where then it is actually 310. Confused yet? Yeah, I definitely think that it feels really peppy. You know, at this point, a lot of things, like Mason had mentioned, have gone to turbocharged small displacement engines paired with a continuously variable transmission. So really, it's quite refreshing to drive something that's a regular, standard issue, 2.5 liter, 4-cylinder engine with a regular transmission. In this case, it is a 6-speed automatic transmission.
Yes.
That is the same as you know, all the previous model years. I did state during the review that you do not have paddle shifters if you didn't get the turbo engine, but we do have paddle shifters on this particular model, so that may have changed for 2020.
And as far as the drivetrains are concerned, it does come standard with front-wheel drive on your 3 lower trim levels. And then if you go for the Grand Touring Reserve or Signature, you have the standard all-wheel drive. But you can option on to the 3 lower models as well. And getting up to speed here, I do want to talk about, you know, the CX-5's ride quality. You know, we've been driving around for a few minutes at this point, and, you know, what I'm noticing is that it's a very comfortable ride. This is definitely probably one of the sportiest offerings, if not the sportiest offering in this entire class, but it is nice to know that, you know, Mazda doesn't really sacrifice the ride quality in order to get that sport, because it does still have a really, really good ride. And I will also deploy our new decibel reader here to just kind of calculate the decibels at cruising speed as well as during our acceleration here. Looks like just here at cruising speeds, we're looking at around 62 decibels entering into the cabin. We've only done one other car with this, and that was the Toyota Highlander. That was around 56. So, you know, not much of a comparison there, but that is just for reference.
And of course, no Mazda review would be complete without mentioning just how fantastic they tune their steering setups. It goes for crossovers and sedans alike. You know, the steering just feels excellent, really naturally weighted, really linear, and really, I can't think of anything else in the class that drives this well. And I'm happy to say that even in this non-turbo version, it still feels a lot sportier than most of the competition, and you know, it's really a pleasure to drive.
And there are also a few 2020 changes to the CX-5's driving dynamics, and that is that, you know, Mazda claims that they improved the noise, vibration, and harshness was inside this cabin. Now, and the other change is that there's a new engine harmonics enhancer, which is supposed to give the engine noise a more refined and powerful note. And then finally, with concluding here, is going to be the fuel economy. So for the 2.5 liter just regular engine with front wheel drive, that's going to be 25 city, 31 highway, 28 combined. If you opt for all wheel drive, it's going to be reduced to 24 city, 30 highway, 26 combined. And then if you go for the all-out turbo engine, that is only all-wheel drive, that's going to be 22 city, 27 highway, 24 combined. So really not that bad in terms of fuel economy. You know, it's pretty much class competitive, especially with that turbo engine, because, you know, that's a very high-end engine.
And overall, I have to say, Mazda CX-5 continues to be a fantastic driving crossover. You know, obviously it's a great overall package, but the extra driving dynamics is just something very, very uncommon in this class. So if that's something you care about, then really the Mazda CX-5 is almost the only game in town.
Alright, so let's go ahead and discuss the pricing. Now keep in mind, these are the prices for the front wheel drive versions. So for the Sport, we're going to start at $25,090. The Touring is $26,730. The Grand Touring is $30,210. And then you have the Grand Touring Reserve that comes standard with all-wheel drive. That's $35,035. And then finally you have the top-end Signature trim for $37,055. Now, Mazda doesn't do much in the way of options. However, we do have the optional beautiful red paint. That's a $595 option. And then when you add the destination charge of $1,045, this particular model as equipped comes in at $36,675, which I definitely have to say, you know, it is a pretty steep price point, but really compared to a lot of its rivals, a lot of them are pushing over $40,000 at this point, and you are getting, I'd say, even more value than a lot of those offerings at $36,000. Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed watching this in-depth look at the 2020 Mazda CX-5 Grand Touring Reserve. We really appreciate you watching, and if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and we'll catch you next time as we sample more of the latest automotive delicacies.